Welcome to our podcast, Talk to Me, Sister. I'm Kathy.
And I am Sarah, and we are twin sisters documenting our surrogacy journey, discussing women's health, motherhood, and all the details that led us here.
Our mission is to not only educate and inform, but to spread joy and hope through our story. Thanks for following along. Hey, Holly.
Hi, Holly.
Hi, you guys. It's so nice to see you.
It's nice to see you too. We're so glad you're here.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm just turning off notifications and things.
You're fine. Go ahead. Take your time. You're good.
Firstly, I just wanted to say, I've only recently come across you guys, and your story is just amazing. I mean, you must get this all the time, but
you're so sweet.
It's really incredible what you guys have been through, both of you, and you know, the love between you guys is unreal.
I know.
Holly, you're so sweet.
That's so sweet. We're really happy to be on this side of the journey, I guess. It's been some hard years, and I'm still in awe of what Kathy's doing for me. And I don't know if you have siblings, but yeah, I feel like the bond of twins and just what the gift that she's giving our family is just unreal. So, and we've had so much fun doing this podcast together.
We have.
Through this pregnancy.
Yeah. So we were talking about it. I was actually talking to my grandma about this yesterday. I was like, you know, if anything, we've really soaked up this time because we're both kind of doers. And so to be on this side of it and to be able to have a podcast and share everything has felt that we are savoring this whole process, which has been awesome. So anyway, thank you for your kind words. And we're just super grateful to be.
People have been so kind throughout this process. And we've loved the podcast too, because we get to connect with amazing women like yourself.
I've loved listening to it. And it's so great listening to you guys rebounding off each other and how different you are. Because you're actually really different.
We are. It is so crazy.
Yeah, I love that you say that because we just have now met, but you can even pick that up. We're best friends, but we're so different too.
Yeah, it's really cool. But no, I do have a sister. Actually, I have one sister, but that bond from twins, I can't imagine the strength of that. It's just amazing. But I can't imagine doing for her what Kathy, what you're doing.
I know.
But then also what you've been through.
I just cry all the time.
I guess you need to take on board. I don't want to preach here, but I feel like you deserve that. You know, Kathy wouldn't be doing it if you didn't deserve that, you know, and you've had a pretty rough ride. So it's just amazing.
That's so kind. That's so sweet. Oh, thank you for saying that. That means a lot.
Yes, you're right. You're right. I wouldn't do it. I'm like you. I work in women's health. I'm a dietitian, and I'm one of those really annoying people who love birth and pregnancy and postpartum, not so much, but we'll see how it goes this time when I'm sleeping more. It felt like a no-brainer. I was like, oh, I'm so excited, and it's like you said, after being through so much, to do something so healing for all of us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this whole process has been healing for Kathy and I for sure, but just our whole family, my parents, my husband. It's just been such a sweet redemption and sweet gift. So
yeah.
Anyway,
well, we're so excited. Thank you for connecting with us. I know it's nice that we're a lot more comfortable with Zoom because of the COVID life. So how's London? How's everything over there?
It's good, actually. Yeah, the sun's come out today, and it's we're just in this transition, I think, going into summer, and it's I'm not ready. I just feel I'm still wearing all my jeans and stuff, and I just feel a bit uncomfortable. I need to
transition your summer clothes.
Save everything.
Yeah, totally. I know.
I'm just not ready. Yeah,
I'm not ready. So it's crazy how the sun is so healing. My mood is so affected by the weather. We're in Nashville, and we've actually had the craziest, rainiest April, and it's been cloudy and rainy. And so the sun is out today too. So I guess we're on London weather too, but it's nice to see the sun.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. It is. Yeah. I'm really pleased to see it. But, I like you guys, running your own business as well. It can be, it's hard going, right? Because there's no off switch and finding time to stop and slow down. And I'm sure we'll talk about this today, but like, I just feel that, I need to listen to my own advice sometimes.
Yes, exactly. 100%.
I say that all the time. That's just what you preach.
Always easier said than done sometimes, for sure.
Definitely.
Well, Holly, we are so excited to have you. And one of the reasons is May is Women's Health Month. And so many of our listeners have hormone related questions. And I work with pregnancy and fertility, but you have specialties that I think people will really gain a ton of knowledge from. So I'm excited to learn from you as well. And I think what I have found, and you may have found this as well, is when we talk to women and counsel women in their own health and menstrual cycles and fertility, is that many women don't know that their cycle is abnormal, because nobody really talks about a healthy menstrual cycle or what's abnormal. Sometimes people go, oh, I just miss my cycle. It's fine, but it comes every once in a while. And we're like, as practitioners, we're like, wait a second, but they don't quite know that's not abnormal because people aren't talking about it. So we're really excited to dive in with you and kind of shed light on like what's a healthy cycle and how to have one.
Yeah, we're so excited. You're so interesting. We can't wait to pick your brain and all your knowledge and all of it. But before we get started and dive into the questions we want to cover, first of all, we love London. We just talked about that. Kathy and I took a trip there. It's been years, honestly. We're still dreaming of scones and cream and shopping on Portobello Road. Love London. Can't wait to go back. But I have a slight obsession with the royal family. And so when I read a little bit about you and connected with you before we started recording, it said, and you told us that you worked for the royal family, and that kind of your experience there is kind of what led you into your career in women's health. So before we dive into specifics and facts, can you tell us a little bit about your background and like your experience with the royal family and how it kind of led you to women's health?
Yeah, sure. So I suppose it's not just that experience that led me into it. I think it's very much it's always been my nature. I'm very, very conscientious, and I landed working there. I was very, very privileged to have been not headhunted, but sort of asked by a recruiting lady. I was very, very early in my career, and it was very much the birth of their office. It was amazing, and very, very small office. And I think they were just looking for, committed, bright young things to just come in and look at and build this office. And it was an incredible time, very much the very, very start of my career. And, I think I just, it definitely isn't that experience on its own, because I've got to be very, very careful.
Yeah, exactly. What you say.
It's, it was just my nature being somebody that wanted to go over and beyond. And I was never really listening to my own passions and what I really wanted to do, which led me into a lot of stress, there are lots of other things going on at the same time. So it's too much to go into in a short space of time. But a lot of stress. I was overtraining. I loved running. I didn't prioritize my health, which is crazy because health was a real interest of mine. I ended up burning out and missing my periods and all sorts of stuff. So it's really difficult to it's really difficult to talk about.
Totally. I bet we just talked too about our early 20s, and just like, we'll talk about burnout and stress and everything in a second, and just how certain moments in your life kind of lead you to being more aware of your body.
100%.
So we totally get that. But we can't wait to dive into your knowledge about women's health. Is really
So you mentioned missing your cycle when you were kind of stressed with work and exercise, and I think a lot of people can relate to that. Is in not even noticing, people going, wait, when was my last period? And so one of your specialties is HA, hypothalamic. I always have a hard time saying it, so you can say it. Amenorrhea. Amenorrhea,
it's a big word.
Which is missing your cycle. So will you explain to people what HA is and kind of the symptoms and the causes of that condition?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, it is definitely a mouthful. So hypothalamic amenorrhea it simply means they got it rolled off the tongue.
You did it.
I say it a lot. So it's basically a lack of a period. In the US, it's for 3 months or more, but in the UK, it's longer. So your period has to have stopped for 6 months consecutively in the UK for you to be sort of diagnosed with amenorrhea. So no period, and this is a result of a miscommunication between the hypothalamus, which is a small region in the brain that controls basically all of our hormones. It's a kind of a gateway between our nervous system and our hormone system. So there's a miscommunication between that and the reproductive cycle. The even more technical term here for you guys, and I'm not doing this to show off, but it's hypogonadotropic hypogonadism. It's amazing.
Well, I'm really glad you did. I didn't have to say that.
I'm not even going to try to repeat that. I'm so impressed.
Yeah, I think we throw out the term amenorrhea a lot, but there's so many different causes of amenorrhea. You're right. So many different types of amenorrhea. So it's so interesting, that connection between the hypothalamus and communicating with kind of the reproductive cycle and organs.
Yes. Exactly. So there's basically this suppression of a secretion of a hormone called GnRH. So that's the hormone that the hypothalamus produces that kicks off the whole cycle. It kicks off the secretion of FSH and LH from the pituitary, and then the growth of the endometrial lining in the uterus, and ovulation. So the development of the folliculus, of the ovarian follicles, and that whole system is shuts down as a result, usually of some form of stress. So physical stress, physiological stress, so things like fasting, inflammation, that kind of thing, and obviously psychological stress. And then usually we tend to see HA a lot in cases of low energy availability or relative energy deficiency, where there's just simply not enough energy in the system to support, your life load, your stress load, your movement, all of this kind of stuff. So there's sort of two halves to this, there's that kind of food and the movement side of it, and then there's that psychological stress piece, but both of them are really important, and you don't have to have both to develop amenorrhea. I think that's really important to sort of make that clear.
Right. It can be one or the other.
Yeah, for sure it can. And I think that's a little bit misunderstood. I think it's very much seen to have been a condition for the young female athlete or exerciser. It's very common in eating disorders as well. So you have that, it is associated with a certain type of lifestyle and body type, but that's not, that's not necessarily what we see. We see it happening in all women, all body sizes, where women are actually eating very well, and actually there's a trauma element. So there's lots of sort of interwoven factors in HA, and I think that's actually why it's very, very fascinating, that interplay between our mental health and our hormones. Amazing.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating, because we've talked about on this podcast mental health and the connection, the body-mind connection, and how real and strong it is. And so it's incredible that you could be sending all of these signals to your body that it's safe, eating enough, exercising in a good amount, and still having trauma that is holding back your body from saying, oh, it's a safe time to ovulate or reproduce.
Yeah, we're big advocates of mental health when it comes to healing and just normalizing your body. So I think that's so important to mention.
Yeah, but even as a practitioner, I think I wouldn't necessarily first go to that if I had a client with amenorrhea. I'd be like, okay, well, so it's fascinating.
It's so important to include.
Yes. So can you mention this too? We often just as women have complaints of like symptoms of amenorrhea, but like talk about why ovulation is important, even if you're not trying to reproduce. Like if you're not trying to get pregnant and you could care less about your FH or your LSH, you could care less. It still comes with side effects and symptoms if you're not having a cycle. So talk about that a little bit.
So this is so fascinating, and I think I'm so pleased that you asked this question, because I think that as women, you know, we've been socialized to see our period as something that is, you know, inconvenient and associated. We only really need it when we want to have a baby, right? Because we only really need to ovulate when we want to have a child. But there are so many other symptoms associated with not having a period. So not having estrogen and progesterone in the system. And if you're not ovulating, you know, if you've got HA, certainly your estrogen is going to be low, but your progesterone is going to be low as well. So things like exhaustion, low energy, brain fog, memory loss. You know, estrogen, for example, boosts synaptic connections in the hippocampus, which is an area in the brain that is associated with memory and emotions. So low mood. So stress and anxiety. So again, low estrogen, really associated with anxiety, and progesterone as well, which is actually a very calming hormone. So one of the metabolites for progesterone, allopregnanolone, is just really soporific. So it helps us to sleep well. So if you imagine you don't have this cycle, you're going to sleep, you know, your sleep's going to be impaired. So those kinds of things are really important. Some of the aesthetics of us ladies, you know, having soft, dewy skin and lustrous hair. You know, estrogen is really supportive of hair growth and tissue growth in general, and bone health, obviously, which I'll talk about in a little bit, because that's more of a long-term consequence of this. And needing to, even things like needing to pee a lot. You know, we don't associate things like needing to go to the loo a lot as something that our hormones are going to be involved in, because estrogen actually helps to build and support linings of the bladder, for example. And when we have when we've got low estrogen, actually the lining of the bladder can thin, and that can mean that, you know, it's a little bit more hypersensitive to nervous stimulation. So actually we feel like we need to go more often.
That's interesting.
What else, guys? There's so much stuff. Loss of muscle mass, and feeling like you're prone to injury, just feeling a little bit achy. Digestive issues. So again, you know, we need a hormone cycle to support, you know, our digestive motility and the health of our gut lining. So all sorts of things, really. I could go on.
There's so many things, and I would say too, low libido, right? Like there's no energy for anything really. So it impacts your energy, your mood, your digestive health. And I like that you mentioned the skin and stuff, because I think sometimes people are like, my digestive health is always bad, like cycle, I don't need it. But then when you bring in like the vanity things, you're like, oh wait, you know, I need my skin and my hair to look good.
And I think it's like when we were talking about when I took the estrogen when I was doing IVF, I was like, I've never looked better.
I was like, you're glowing. Oh my God.
I like this estrogen protocol. It was low estrogen, but it's still.
But it's like what brings the pregnancy glow is that progesterone coming up too.
Yeah.
And so it's fascinating.
It's interesting actually, because, you know, estrogen is a natural antioxidant. So it's one of the reasons why it's quite cardioprotective. And actually it's one of the theorized reasons why it's, you know, women later on in life are going to be more prone to dementia, because they have that drop in estrogen. So if you think about estrogen as being an antioxidant, you know, that's where some of those more aesthetic qualities come in around that too. So estrogen is just a remarkable, both of them, estrogen and progesterone, are remarkable hormones.
Well, I've seen that as well with I worked at the cardiovascular genetic lab for a long time. And when I say a long time, it was like 5 years. So it felt like a long time.
That's a long time.
But I noticed postmenopausal women who had that drop in estrogen, also their cholesterol went up, you know, so you're having that same, you know, effect of the dementia and the heart health, probably plaque buildup and inflammation and things like that happening to their cardiovascular health as well.
Yeah, and we see that a lot on tests with clients with HA, is actually high cholesterol. And then, you know, unfortunately, and this is, you know, to do no disservice at all to the medical community who are just doing that, being responsible and doing their job. But, you know, there's a lot of take out the fat and don't eat this and that. And actually, it's the estrogen that's helping, you know, estrogen helps to clear the cholesterol out of the blood vessels. So that's another reason why actually no, we just need to fix the hormones and then all these things will make sense. But yeah, some of the longer term effects, I think probably we'll just touch on those because they're quite, that women might be interested to know that your cycle and actually having a period, having a hormone cycle is very important for bone health. So again, we're talking about estrogen specifically here, but estrogen is bone protective. It supports bone building via a number of mechanisms, but it helps to support your bone density. So when it's low for a long period of time, you can develop osteopenia. So that's low bone density in area of the body, which is scary.
It is scary.
It's scary for young women as well to think that, we tend to not want to look too far ahead into our lives, but actually, looking after our hormones now and having a regular cycle is an important part of our longevity, really, and health in the future.
That's so important.
If you have been listening along to the pod, you know we love high quality vitamins that are worth your time and your money. Seeking Health vitamins are our favorite because they are not synthetic and they are easily absorbable.
We have a new coupon code exclusive to our audience. It's 10% off your first order from seekinghealth.com. So use our code TalkToMeSister for 10% off. That's talk2 with the number 2, me sister, for 10% off.
We will link all of this information in the show notes. Enjoy.
We're going to get into how to kind of recover a healthy period a little later on. But first, let's talk about PCOS because HA and PCOS are often misdiagnosed. A portion of our audience that are listening might be dealing with PCOS or have dealt with PCOS. Can you explain a little bit more about PCOS and the difference between the two?
PCOS is we see it more as a metabolic condition. So it involves, some of the similarities, firstly, I guess, between PCOS and HA are that in PCOS, you classically, you don't ovulate. So you're also going to experience amenorrhea. And that's one of the reasons why, one of many reasons why it can be misdiagnosed, but both can be misdiagnosed as the other. Usually it's HA is misdiagnosed for polycystic ovarian syndrome, but there are also there's imbalances in hormones that are taking place usually as a result of again imbalances in blood sugar, so insulin, inflammation, adrenal problems, so stress as well. So we can think there's actually different causes of polycystic ovarian syndrome, and actually I think there's 3 different conditions. I think there's inflammatory, there's stress prone, and there's insulin. So really understanding what the picture is for the individual is important. But like with HA, one of the things that we often see is multiple follicles on ultrasound. So you've got immature follicles that aren't developing properly because there is no ovulation. And the key thing that differentiates HA with polycystic ovarian syndrome is high androgen levels. So you don't classically see elevated androgens with HA, but we know that in I call it PCOS, we get this raised androgens on blood tests, but also symptoms. So things like acne and excess facial hair growth, and also hair loss. So hair loss from the scalp, and that's very traumatic. But also we see that in HA as well. So again, it's there's, if you're presenting with amenorrhea and multiple follicles on ultrasound and hair loss, we cannot, I don't think we can diagnose that as one or the other. We have to do further investigation to see what's going on. So exactly. They're very, very different. And the problem is that conventionally PCOS is treated but with a sort of low carb diet, increase your exercise, lose weight.
Gosh.
That's a
for
problem.
HA, that's not great.
That's not great, is it?
That's not great. I actually have this experience personally. And I do want to clarify too, for listeners who don't know what androgens are, those are male hormones. So like your testosterone would go up, for example, your DHEA would go up, resulting in like facial hair, acne, things like that. Right. But anyway, this happened to me. So my first year of college is before, I was in school to be a dietitian, but I did not have the knowledge, right? So you're still I'm still relying on my doctor to tell me what's up. But in college, my first year, I did the opposite of what other people did, and I lost 15 pounds. This was not intentional. My anxiety was out the roof. I was away from Sarah for the first time. I was away from my boyfriend. It just was like
a lot of changes,
walking everywhere. I absolutely could have been, subconsciously like cool with it. I was like, oh, okay, this works. But I lost 15 pounds. My cycle went away. I went to the doctor and they said, you have PCOS. And I was like, I read the diagnosis of PCOS and I said, this is not what I have. But I didn't know HA. And then when I learned HA later in my career, I was like, oh, that's what I had. I still on a BMI scale was a healthy weight. And so I think that's an important thing to focus too on, is like, I had lost weight pretty quickly, but I was still like, the doctor looked at me and was like, oh, you exercise 3 times a week. You're a healthy weight for your height. But I still was suffering from a lot of these symptoms that you mentioned of HA, not PCOS. And it really did continue to kind of drive my interest in female health. So I think it's so important to do your research and be your own health advocate. And also, as you mentioned, conventional medicine kind of puts you in this category pretty quickly. And it's so important to ask for further testing if you're one that's like, I don't think that's me. Right.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not medical incompetence either. I think it's simply that the medical community is still taught a lot about polycystic ovarian syndrome and not so much about HA, although hopefully that will change. But I think this must happen a lot. Well, I know it happens a lot, certainly to some of the women that I work with. And it's just often it's not, you don't have to do that much more investigation, but just a little bit more searching around, and actually logging some of those symptoms. Hopefully the answer should be there. So, yeah.
I would love to talk about, now that we've kind of clarified the difference between PCOS and HA, let's dive in and talk about ways to, if you are having amenorrhea, so if you're missing a cycle, specifically for HA, what are some ways that we can support a healthy menstrual cycle? Of course, as a dietitian, I go straight to like nourishment and food, but I would love to know kind of your top 3 ways to really support a healthy menstrual cycle.
Yeah, great question. And I think just like with you, everything is done on an individual basis. So again, we've got to look at what's the kind of root cause and the driving factors for that individual. Usually, eat more, move less has become this conventional prescription that we do roll out. We see this talked about a lot. But it may be that there are other things that we need to work on as a priority, but generally speaking, the 3 things are going to be looking at the energy availability. So just making sure that, there's enough nourishment in the body, that you're eating the right composition of foods, which we can talk about, to make sure that the right signals are getting to the brain, to the hypothalamus at the right time. Because remember, the hypothalamus has got receptors for things like insulin and glucose, so and proteins and fats via hormones exchange. So making sure that the diet is able to communicate to your brain that, and so it's not just as simple as calories in, calories out. It's about looking at what you're eating and when you're eating it as well.
Interesting.
Yeah, definitely timing is the key factor when we're looking at balancing out that kind of cortisol, low blood sugar, hypoglycemic cortisol state, which is where
that's an important thing, because so many people are into fasting and like skipping breakfast. And so, I would love to know more about that.
I was going to ask an off script question, because I was trying to heal my body a lot after chemo and what it's been through. Obviously, I don't have a period because I had a hysterectomy, but just like getting my hormones back on track. And there's like this buzz out there that's like intermittent fasting, and fasting is the best way to heal the body. And so I feel like Kathy's always like, eat, nourish your body. Then I hear the fasting thing. So I know there's a lot of people out there, and women and friends that I have that like swear by intermittent fasting and fasting. So like, what's healthy for your hormones? What's good? What's not good in your opinion?
So if you have a healthy cycle, if you have a female hormone cycle, then fasting is something that you need to look at. You need to approach with caution always, because any form of fasting is going to increase cortisol, and cortisol is going to interact with the female hormone axis at every single point. So it's got to be done really carefully and responsibly. The evidence around fasting has been done, generally speaking, in studies have been done on men, but they've been done very successfully. And what they have found is, improved mitochondrial function, which is basically mitochondria are like your little kind of energy powerhouses in the cells. So, there's a lot of health promoting effects for, later on in life, and improving our ability to produce energy. But I think just bear in mind, massive caveat to this is that all the studies weren't done in hormone, in somebody with a hormone cycle. So yeah, I think generally speaking, I'm kind of with Kathy on the whole eat.
Eat and not so much fast.
And like Holly mentioned, there's so much of your healthy hormones that do respond to glucose and insulin. And of course, there's a bell curve there. With too much and too little, you have issues, but you need those things. Carbs are not the enemy. And also, I think that like some people are just going in the morning and just doing coffee, and those can increase your cortisol as well, right?
Yes, 100%. So we're definitely careful. I mean, caffeine we could do a whole episode on caffeine because there's so much.
That's my next question. Yeah.
But no, I think the carbohydrate one is really important. And I think a lot of women are quite fearful around carbohydrate intake, and carbohydrates are a really, really vital energy source. Our brains respond really well to carbohydrate intake because it gives us immediate access to glucose, and, the availability of that carbohydrate matters. But also things like serotonin production. So carbohydrates are what gives us this insulin spike. And without that, we can't get amino acids like tryptophan into the brain. So we can't make things like serotonin. And serotonin is a hormone that makes us happy. So
need more serotonin.
Yeah. And also women, we don't make so much serotonin as men. We make about half the amount in the brain, and we're less efficient at recycling it. So this is one of the reasons why women are more prone to anxiety and depression.
I didn't know that. We make less serotonin. Oh, can't wait to ask about that.
Yeah. So we've got it, and then we're trying to do all these low carb diets, and it's not really working.
And it's dropping. Yeah.
Well, I've read that too, that a lot of the ketogenic, low carb diets that people are also trending.
Yes, did not work for me.
We're also studied that don't work for most. So yeah, but we're also just studied in the male population, like you mentioned with intermittent fasting. And we have completely different needs, especially in childbearing years. So I'm so glad you mentioned that, because the research is just not there for women. And I will tell you my personal experience. I was like, okay, I always try something. If my clients are like, what do you think about it? I'm like, okay, I'll try it. If I fast in the morning, you guys, I eat so much the rest of the day. I think I'm just starved, and my body is like,
I used to be one of the people that would like rush off to work. We mentioned this in like a previous episode where, I would just coffee, 3 cups of coffee, finish my, and then have a late lunch. And it was just terrible. I don't have a period now, but I never really had regular periods, pre-baby. I know we could do a whole episode on coffee, but for the listeners who love caffeine, can you just give like a 20-second spiel on if it's good, like how it affects your hormones, how it's bad, how it's, intake and all that?
So the major thing that caffeine does is it ramps up our cortisol output. So it's got a stimulating effect on our stress response, our sympathetic nervous system. And I think that there is no actual evidence that says that more caffeine equals no ovulation, but we've got plenty of evidence to show its effect on our stress response, and when I say no direct evidence, I'm really convinced that there's this strong link back into HA. So when it comes to hormone health, coffee, the amount that you're having is really significant. So if you imagine that there's 400 milligrams in a massive venti, like Starbucks venti, that's too much already. Like that's too much for our hormones.
So much.
Yeah.
Venti. It is pretty. Yeah.
It's a lot. And, really for our hormones, a little bit of caffeine, okay, but I think we want to have it with some fat. So I always say to have some fat in it to slow down the absorption of the caffeine and buffer the effects.
Patty's smiling. She loves that.
I love it. I love it so
much. Even if you're adding like full fat milk or just some normal milk or some some people like coconut oil and butter and things like that, but having a little bit of fat in there is really helpful. Trying not to have it after midday, because then we have I think it's a 12-hour half-life of caffeine. I'm not entirely sure if that's right, 8 to 12-hour half-life. So it's still going to be in your system at night, and that's going to disrupt your sleep, and we don't even want to go into the issue of sleep.
Right. Gosh.
Yeah, and also probably having it away from meals directly, just because there's an anti-nutrient effect. So caffeine has this kind of anti-nutrient effect where it binds to beneficial things like minerals and can inhibit absorption. So I find this actually very hard personally. I always want a coffee after a meal.
Yes, me too.
So it's kind of just maybe just delaying it a little bit, just giving yourself 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and then having a coffee if you can. But again, that's in an ideal world. But yeah, coffee really does have an impact on our hormones. So it's got to be, I think, haven't taken sort of responsibly as well. But I say this with, I love coffee. So
right, it's one of those that's easier said than done as advice for sure.
It's a vice. It's a vice for sure. But you gave good recommendations, and some people listening are like, "Dang, I have to give up my 3 p.m. cup of coffee." But
it's time. It's time. People.
You've mentioned stress a few times over the episode. Can we talk about stress and just like how to heal hormone stress?
Yeah, I think this is probably the hardest thing to do. I mean, we can all, adjusting your food intake and even your exercise. Well, I may say this lightly, that can be difficult too. But managing our stress is such a big part of, not just a woman with HA, of all of our lives. And it affects us all differently. It's a key element in the polycystic ovarian syndrome woman as well. And what works for one woman won't work for someone else. So because we are kind of bombarded with continual demands on ourselves every single day, we wake up to an alarm clock and we've got emails coming in and deadlines, and we miss a train, and then our body doesn't recognize the difference, and we have the same hormonal physiological response to each of these little stresses, that these little pings that go off in our lives. So when it comes to managing stress, building in activities into your day to kind of like small consistent activities to help buffer some of the stress. It's not enough to just say, okay, well, I'm just going to go hard and then have an hour or two on the weekend to chill. Like, I think we need to bring in little practices, like even if it's things like breathing techniques or time in nature or whatever, meditation, mindfulness. I'm not a massive fan of it because I could never do it. So me asking my clients to do it, it just doesn't work. Actually makes people anxious. Yeah.
That's a great example of what works for somebody else won't work for somebody for everybody.
So but things like that, like trauma release therapy or like massage or something more physical might work for you, where you're actually giving yourself this almost allowing your
release.
It's like naturally release. It's more of a kind of physical release than a sort of psychological one, especially if anxiety is is a factor for you. And even things like, I think I'm sure you'll use food with clients who are anxious. So actually, the way, again, we come back to things like balancing our blood sugar and making sure we've got enough omega-3 and all sorts of certain types of nutrients in the diet that actually support our nervous system and our adrenal health as well. So there's so many angles we can come at with this. Interestingly, having a good routine, that's really helpful for managing your stress. Uncertainty and unpredictability that we've all experienced so much over the last year. These things are actually quite stressful for the body. So even, it's one of the reasons why I don't like telling women to sort of just suddenly change their whole life and routine. We have got to do things slowly, and building a nice routine that you enjoy into your life is helpful for people. There's a lot there. I mean, there's a big web of things we could talk about.
I like that you said too, because I think a lot of people relate to this. You said you can't just go for days at a time and then rest on the weekend. And I think that's a really smart, tangible suggestion, is to create it every single day in small moments. Sarah and I were just talking about turning my phone off. I was like, I want to be present for my kids every day from 4 to 8. My phone's going to go off, and it like, even the idea of it made me like, oh, I don't, just communicating that and having that boundary is important. And I think a lot of us don't do that, especially working from home. Like you said, you run a small business, you're answering emails. We know people want a response. So I think that people hopefully are becoming better at setting boundaries because we're talking about it. But it's incredible, the connection between our cycle and our stress. So we've mentioned exercise a handful of times, but tangibly, over-exercising is a form of stress, but I never want to discourage people from exercising, because like you said, it also can be a form of stress management. Like Sarah and I have talked about this, where like her stress management is like art and calm and music. And I would prefer to like go to a cycling class and sweat from head to toe and just like,
I love that too. Let's don't discredit. I do exercise. I do exercise, but breathing techniques, you mentioned that. I love that.
Yeah. That's
but let's talk about exercise. Kathy's right. A lot of people could be like, oh, exercise causes stress. I don't have to exercise.
It's a hard balance. So is there a tangible recommendation you can give people who are maybe skipping their cycle or trying to recover their healthy menstrual cycle, and our exercisers just love it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is really interesting. I actually never say to somebody, don't exercise at all. And that goes against certainly there are other professionals that would disagree with me. So I actually do think keeping something in is helpful. And it's interesting to know that that kind of mental health, like stress management prescription dose of exercise is about 150 minutes a week. So that's the research that we've got on stress management. And you don't need to do any more than that. That's actually around 30 minutes a day. So it's not a lot, but it might be that, you commit to that and you use it really you enhance that time by spending that time outside in whatever you're doing, whether or not that's a walk, or it could be that it could be something a little bit more active. And again, it's got to be taken on a case by case sort of thing. I don't really want to say everyone can run, because I don't think that's helpful. I think a lot of women should probably not run. So and just opening your eyes to other ways of moving your body, but giving yourself, some time to move your body is helpful for most people, unless, relative energy deficiency is a big thing for you. And one of the things I really found helpful was yoga. And I actually trained as a yoga teacher whilst I was recovering. So I was very much became a yogi, and I never was one.
I love yoga.
So and it's not just about the movement, it's just about that mindset it cultivates around not having to push your body. So whatever you're doing, you're keeping yourself certainly within a certain effort bracket. You kind of really, if you're recovering from HA, you don't really want to go over 50%, 60% of your perceived effort. So whatever you do, try and, you should still be able to hold a conversation. And that can be helpful, because then you know that you're not pushing your body too far, you're not pushing your heart rate, pushing up their cortisol response, things like that.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice. When I was recovering and just trying to get my body stronger after all it had been through, I remember feeling frustrated that I couldn't just like go do like this kickboxing class or something. So I had to kind of be patient with my body and balancing my hormones and getting my health back. And even just like what you said, just a walk, breathing techniques, starting with yoga. I'm a huge fan of Pilates, and it's just like, it's easy on the body, but it's like a very like mind body exercise, which I'm a huge fan of. And I think that what you just said was a really great advice, kind of just,
I think this is interesting too. People may want to know, Sarah had a hysterectomy, but still has her ovaries. So she still has a hormonal cycle, which is really interesting, because she can like feel those waves. And it's still important to balance hormones. I think a lot of people think, oh, you have a hysterectomy, you've been straight to menopause, but that's a whole different conversation.
That's a whole different conversation. And it was wild, because it's like, as women, when we have our period, it's kind of like, oh, that's my body's way of saying, oh, it's this time of the month. I don't really get that physical evidence anymore. So I had to train myself into understanding certain, like what my body was feeling throughout the month. I actually still get cramps, like kind of crampy feelings in my ovaries. But yeah, it was kind of wild because I still, even though I wasn't physically getting a period, I had to work really hard on kind of regaining my hormone cycle and making that healthy and making sure I stayed healthy. Obviously with the nutrition stuff, Kathy helped a lot. But what you said about exercise too, I just, I found it really beneficial for me to find those like mind body exercise techniques, including yoga. I'm a huge fan. So.
Well, you are a wealth of knowledge. I have learned from you. I've learned about estrogen. I've learned about serotonin. I've learned so much. I love talking to people with specialties. We have just loved this conversation. We could talk for probably 3 more hours.
Clearly we're advocates. Of women's health. This is kind of Kathy's like wheelhouse. I love hearing you guys chat. I learned so much from you specifically. Before, I know we have to wrap up, but will you tell everybody kind of where to find you, your Instagram handle, your website, just kind of where to learn more about you and what you do?
Thank you. Well, my Instagram handle is Holly Dunn Nutrition, and my website is hollydunn.co.uk. And most of the information is probably, on both. If you're kind of more into you're in the professional world, I'm also on LinkedIn. But I have a few things on my website, so you can feel free to take I have a hormone and energy quiz you can take, which actually goes through a lot of what we spoke about today. So, it might help you kind of identify what's the area that you're, where you're depleted in your life. And, there's lots of sort of helpful information on there, and you can always book a call with me if you want to have a chat. So I do that. I tend to work with women one-to-one. But I've been for a while considering writing a book or doing a program, and I just can't quite decide. I'm working towards both. We'll see what happens. Yeah.
No, we're talking about not making stressful. One at a time, Holly. One at a time.
Baby steps.
Exactly.
But we're encouraging you to do it.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Well, we're going to put your information and how to connect with you in our show notes so that our audience can reach out to you. We will take the quiz. That's interesting. Love that. But thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been so lovely to meet you guys. And I think you're just amazing what you're doing.
It's lovely to meet you too.
Yeah, that was a good impression. No, we're going to come to London because I freaking love London. Yeah, we're going to come see you.
I really, really want to meet you, so you've got to come over.
Yeah,
we do too. Well, thank you, Holly. You're incredible. You stay healthy and safe, and we'll talk very soon.
Thank you, guys. You take care. Bye.
Bye.